Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Working It Out, Porchlight's monthly webinar series where we bring panelists together to discuss issues that affect our workforce. My name is Jessica Myers. I'm CEO of Porchlight, and today our subject is the economic and community impact of rural broadband in South Dakota. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit about Porchlight and what we do. Porchlight's focus is on rural workforce development, and we approach this work three different ways. First, we work with candidates through resume writing and interview prep. Next, we partner with companies and organizations that have either a rural footprint or want to hire rural employees. And lastly, we come alongside rural communities to conduct support services in strategic planning, housing studies, community assessments, and our very own Porchlight certification reserved for communities with populations of 5,000 or fewer. I share all of this to say we understand rural. We are from rural communities, and we see the incredible opportunity in our rural areas. Expanding broadband to every corner of South Dakota and the Midwest has had the same impact as the electrification of farms in the 1930s. Building on this crucial piece of infrastructure in our rural communities opens up opportunities to keep and attract rural residents and imagine what could be possible for years to come. So let's get started. To kick off the webinar, I'm going to pass it over to our Director of Policy and Communities here at Porchlight, Burke Ermintrout.
Thank you, Jessica. My name is Burke Ermintrout. I'm the Director of Policy and Communities here at Porchlight, and I am excited to introduce our fantastic panelists. We'll hear a presentation from each of them and then take some time for Q&A and discussion. As you listen to the panelists, we encourage you to put questions in the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom window. Once each of the panelists has had a chance to present, we'll have some time for all three of them to respond to the questions you ask. First up, we have Shirley Bloomfield. Shirley is the Chief Executive Officer of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, the premier association representing over 850 independent telecommunications companies that are leading innovation in rural and small town America. With more than 30 years of experience representing the country's smallest telecom operators, she is an expert on the role of federal communications policies in sustaining the vitality of rural and remote communities and the benefits rural broadband networks bring to millions of American families and businesses in the national economy. Welcome, Shirley.
Thank you so much, Burke. It is a treat to be with you all here today. So the topic is near and dear to my heart. What impact does broadband actually have on rural communities? So let me just first say, NTCA, Burke had mentioned, we have a footprint across the country. Our providers, of which there are numerous in South Dakota, covering about 2/3 of the landmass of the state, really are those drivers of economic growth. So one of the things I wanted to do is share with you a little bit about some statistics. And these are statistics. This is like the homework part of the session here today. These statistics come from a recent study that we had done for the Center for Rural Innovation, kind of really trying to highlight what happens to a community when people in that community understand the power of the broadband that they have access to, but probably just as importantly, have access to high quality, future-proof technology. And you're going to hear from one of our NTCA providers and somebody who's a leader in the industry after I share some thoughts here today about what he's doing in South Dakota. But these numbers here really speak for themselves. When you have rural counties that have high broadband adoption rates, you see things like a 213% higher business growth. So this is really, what you see is you see more business openings compared to counties that have lower broadband utilization. On average, rural communities with low broadband usage actually lose 3 to 4 businesses a year. You've got a 10% higher self-employment growth, and that's pretty self-explanatory, right? The ability to be entrepreneurial, the ability to open your own business, run your own show, connect to global markets, transfer essential resources, have access to banking and small business loans and venture capital. All of those things really grow when you have broadband, particularly broadband that is fueled by a fiber-built network. You have a 44% higher GDP growth. Again, the same kind of thing. In high broadband use in rural communities, you've actually got a fostering of local businesses, that ability to trigger a chain reaction growth brings growth. So what does that mean in terms of the ability to create a dynamic economy? And another thing, beyond what we saw during the pandemic, and you also have an 18% higher per capita income growth. So your communities that have that broader adoption that were deployed as well as utilized have higher incomes. These are numbers that have been done through a comprehensive study that we had run from 2020 to 2022. So capturing some of that post-pandemic impact that I think shows that existing residents in these rural communities with access to broadband have higher opportunities and higher opportunity for economic gain. So I want to share that because that's a part of the equation that really runs on the numbers, the things that we can quantify. The other part of the equation that I do just want to touch on is what it does for communities. We like to think about it in terms of building smart rural communities. And it's one of the reasons I love the mission that Porchlight has, the mission about how do you grow and revitalize rural America. So Burke, if you could just turn to the next slide, I'm just going to chat a tiny bit about some of the things that we see happening in rural communities when you've got this robust broadband. I think everybody kind of can intellectualize this, but when you see it on the ground, it's incredibly powerful. But what you can do with smart agriculture, the ability to bring that technology to the farm, keep family farms in place, allow greater efficiency is powerful when connecting to the global markets. The ability for education, again, we saw that during the pandemic, and that became kind of somewhat of the norm. But the ability to think beyond just kids no longer have snow days because you can stay connected to your school at any time. But think about it in terms of the ability to retrain your workforce, to have those local health officials stay up to date on training. Same with innovation, same with AI. Where does all of that fall into the world of what you can do when you've got access to connections and experts across the country and across the world? And telehealth for me is one of the applications that I think has such a huge opportunity for rural communities. We know that there's some very basic staples that people need when they move to a rural community. Porchlight's going to do a great job making sure that you've got access to jobs and connecting employers. But people are going to be also looking for, what does your healthcare situation look like? Aging demographics. How do you make sure you can stay tied to the highest services possible? Telehealth is an application that really allows the distance and kind of the handicap of geography to really shrink in a rural community. The ability to connect to learning hospitals and teaching hospitals is incredibly powerful. So all of these things really kind of point to why technology matters and how they all work together to create smart rural communities. And here at NTCA, we're incredibly bullish that the creation of these smart rural communities is really what is going to drive a rural renaissance, the ability for rural communities to retain their best and their brightest, and to be able to continue to grow. And that growth just will continue to offer more resources. So, as I kind of wrap and have the other panelists kind of share some of their thoughts, I do want to share a few other things from an NTCA perspective. My folks provide technology, but they are also community leaders. And when I think about, again, what does it take to really create a smart rural community? Yeah, it's a fiber network, and that is key, and that is underlying. But it is also things like the ability to do digital education, how to train people in the community to actually use the technology that's available, the ability to think about where they can play a role in terms of training your future workforce, daycare options, why all of those things matter to the vitality of a rural community. My member companies are also very engaged in cybersecurity, how they can work with their customers and the networks that they manage to keep their customers safe, to keep their network safe, to keep the data safe. And last but not least, my member companies have just embarked on a mission to be a little bit of the eyes and ears in their community in terms of sex trafficking. And we've created what we call Operation iFast with the Guardian Group, which is really training the technicians and the folks on the ground and NTCA member companies in these rural communities to be aware and to be on the watch for what is taking place in their community. And again, we think all of those components, the economic vitality, the safety, the economic welfare, really come together to create these communities. And that is why broadband, and particularly working with community-based broadband providers, is such a driving factor. So Burke, I'm going to leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you, Shirley. Really appreciate that great information. Next up is Ross Petrick, who is the General Manager and CEO of Alliance Communications. He joined the cooperative more than 9 years ago, and he serves on the SDN and NTCA Board of Directors and is active on state associations and networks in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. Alliance is based in Garrettson, South Dakota, and serves customers in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. The cooperative has provided voice, video, and broadband services for more than 67 years. Alliance recently expanded its fiber optic network into rural Rock County, Minnesota, in areas north, south, and east of Sioux Falls. I'll turn it over to you, Ross.
Thank you, Burke. Yes, and thanks for inviting me to share our story. Yes, Alliance Communications, we've been a fiber to the home provider of broadband internet for over 65, actually 67 years. And pretty much been doing fiber to the home before there was an iPhone. So we were doing it even before it was fashionably correct to do in the industry. So we are a cooperative owned by our members. Recently, we've been expanding in different areas of our service territory and outside of our service territory in all three of our states, South Dakota, Minnesota, and in Iowa. And again, been serving areas in and around the Sioux Falls area for the most part over the years, but we do also cover more rural areas such as Howard and Oldham and down by Alcester, down south of Sioux Falls as well. So with that, I'll kind of explain a little bit what broadband has done in our communities, and then explain a little bit about what we've been doing in our communities, whether it's related to broadband or just being a community-based provider. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about some of the expansion work we've been doing. We've been working with different grant programs, both federal and state grant programs to bring broadband to new areas. We call underserved or unserved areas. And we've seen some really good success in those areas, not only just in penetration rates, but also just in success in bringing services to some of the customers that need it. Our Net Promoter Score, or a score that we like to look at in some of those areas, as far as would these customers promote us to their neighbor, is well over 80 and almost into the 90% as far as Net Promoter Score goes. A successful Net Promoter Score is over 30 or 40, actually. So we are very, very high, seeing very, very high numbers in those areas, and people are striving or really wanting our services in there. But I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing in some of these areas just for promoting community development or economic development. One of the things that we did not too long ago was we started our own first USDA red light program, and Dana might be talking about that later. But our anchor tenant was actually a daycare here in town in Garrettson, South Dakota. So we had started that, and we had kind of realized that broadband follows babies, or the kids for that matter. Especially see that when we have snowstorms and school's called off. We see a huge spike in broadband when the kids are at home. And that's kind of very similar to the way we approach some of our economic development things as well, is the community can't grow if we don't have some of the core facilities or meet some of the needs of the community. And daycare has been a huge one in a lot of our communities. So we actually did start up our program with that anchor tenant. Since then have donated 0% loans to another daycare over in Crooks, South Dakota, and then have also donated some land and some time to a daycare over in Hills, Minnesota as well, to help get them going. They had a very interesting and unique situation where they actually started up a daycare and leased out the facilities to other providers, which was, I think, first of its kind in Minnesota. So we had helped with some land donation there as well. But not only that, but we have also assisted in some development of some industrial parks. Crooks Industrial Park was a project of ours to help get going as well. And that was very successful. I believe they sold almost all of their lots in a matter of almost 18 months. So we were there to help with the financing and some of the development plans as well for that the development park. I've also heard some really unique stories about from different contractors over the past that actually had a contractor in our office working on some remodeling, and when he was done, did a very good job. And I explained to him, like, I really appreciate what you do and thanks for getting it done and not being so disruptive to the employees or the customers that are coming in. And he turned around and said, no, thank you so much for what you do. And I said, me? And he's like, well, no, your company brought broadband into this development, which was just outside of town about 5 years ago. And he said, because we did that, he was able to build at least 3 homes in that development almost the month after we had brought fiber to that area. He said that the people were looking to go into that area, but they were not ready to pull the trigger until they knew that they could work from home. So that was pretty interesting to hear that actually a direct result in what we did to bring fiber to that community helped build that community and get work for that contractor and other contractors too. So interesting thing a little bit about network data or network. I talked a little bit about what we've been doing in the communities as a community-based provider, but we have seen quite a few small businesses recently have come to us and asked for additional services. And it's really great to tell them, yes, we can provide that, or we'll figure it out, rather than, okay, that's great, but construction won't happen until next year. So having those facilities in the ground has been really good for immediate demand. We've seen a lot of businesses ask for increased bandwidth recently, or help with firewalls and some cybersecurity measures and things of that sort. So we've been trying to help a lot of our small businesses and communities with some of those issues as well. And I think that those are kind of unseen or maybe untalked about things. But if you try to keep your community safe, and Shirley talked about it with the iFast program as well. But if you try to keep your community safe, not only just safe in general, but safe online, I think it makes a stronger community, and you're able to add benefit not only through the network or the bandwidth that you provide, but also the services you provide too. So we've seen a huge amount of success in that area as well, and just supporting small businesses and what they do. Their online presence is becoming more and more valuable to them, and keeping connected is almost a necessity, just as much as keeping the front door open, which is really interesting because you're hearing stories of people in the middle of almost nowhere as far as the world is concerned, but home for us in South Dakota, and they're shipping out things that they make at home or down on Main Street. So it's really nice to be the connection from the local Main Street to the world, and keeping that connection up is important to us. With that, I'll hand it back.
Awesome. Thank you, Ross. That was a great presentation. Great to hear, some of the specifics of what's happening right here in South Dakota. Our final presenter today is Dana Kleinsasser, who currently serves as the Deputy State Director for USDA Rural Development in South Dakota, bringing over 30 years of experience in various roles within the USDA. Throughout her career, she's held significant positions, including Branch Chief for Single Family Housing Guaranteed, Program Director for Rural Business and Cooperative Programs, and Loan Specialist and Technician. Dana also worked for Farm Service Agency as a Farm Loan Officer. She holds a bachelor's degree in business administration, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Dana.
Okay, thank you, Burke. and happy holidays to everyone. And thank you for this opportunity to share with you today about what rural development has done and what we can do in the area of broadband. As I've listened to Ross and Shirley, I've noticed so many ways that we connect. And Ross mentioned our Red Leg program, and that's a fabulous program, and we love to use that with the co-ops in the state. And I'm also going to give you an idea of how we work with organizations like Shirley's and just connect in a lot of other ways. Economic development is a unique arena, and we're all connected in so many ways when we think of economic development. So rural development's mission is to assist rural communities in creating prosperity, so they're self-sustaining and economically thriving through investments that create ladders of opportunity. And we like to think of building resilience and support growth of emerging markets. So as a federal agency, we always like to share our mission. And Burke, you can advance to the next slide. I think the mission is listed there. I always like to share that just because it really ties things together in that particular area. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Reconnect history and a little history of broadband. And the next slide shows that. In March of 2018, as you can see from this slide, Congress approved $600 million to USDA for broadband infrastructure. And then in December of 2018, Reconnect was launched. So the Reconnect program is a big one for us. And the statistics here show that in round one, we had 146 applications. And we had 1.4 billion in funding. So you can see the numbers and the dollars there are large. And there's 100% loan, 100% grant, or a combination of loan and grant available in this particular program. And then round two, we got 172 applications, and then we had 1.57 billion in funding. And this is nationwide. So right now I'm talking about nationwide, and you can see that it's large. So that was all on the federal side. And then I also wanted to make the connection of how we connected with the state side. And the state of South Dakota in March of 2019 responded, and they implemented the Connect South Dakota broadband program, which has been a fabulous asset for the state. And it paired up very well with the federal side and what we could do at USDA Rural Development. So that's great. And if you're not familiar with that, I'd encourage you to do a little research on that Connect South Dakota broadband program. And, you know, between state and federal funding sources and then the matching industry investment, more than 203 million has been invested into South Dakota broadband. And really, South Dakota is doing a good job of tracking the program, so we know where we're at in the state, and that's been really fun to see. Then next, the impact. I wanted to just talk a little bit about the impact from 2019 to 2023. And you can see here 26,000 homes, businesses, farms, critical access facilities gained access to high-speed broadband in South Dakota. That's a big number. Lots of just, you know, different avenues. When you're talking a business, we all know you need it there. The farms, I think the agriculture, we've seen a lot of interest and need there. And there's more coming. Other partners are building out more after different grants that they've received. One example I'll just share is Ogallala, Lakota. They were recently awarded, so this development is coming. And then another one that I wanted to mention was SDN Communications. They're building out some in the Black Hills area, so that's continuing on. This has just provided a lot of opportunities for remote work. And thinking about that, I can't help but be reminded of Porchlight and what they are doing. And it's a great example of what a community can do when they have quality broadband, and Porchlight can come in and help communities look at their access and look at the situation, and that help them find the resources there to assist. So I like to highlight that because I've been very impressed with Porchlight and what you guys are doing there. Telemedicine, that's a big area for us. And I'll use Avera. They recently got what we call a distance learning and telemedicine grant, and they were awarded funding to provide 28 end user sites across South Dakota with technology for virtual nurses. So we all know how important that is becoming. To be able to connect virtually to healthcare needs and doctors and things like that. So we're seeing a lot of activity there. And that last grant, there were 25 grant awards from USDA Rural Development. So there's some pretty big numbers coming down in that area. Distance learning, this is one of my favorites. And when I'm finished here, I'll maybe put a link in the chat to this, but I wanted to just mention this Teachwell story. So Teachwell, they deliver virtual speech, physical, and occupational therapies throughout South Dakota. And their distance learning and telemedicine grant was more in the area of education. So Teachwell Solutions, they just show this off very well. And the instructor, Melissa Braun, she explains it really well in these stories. And there's a couple kids that are highlighted, and their mothers are on there, and they're just telling how this is really filling a need for their children to get the access to the training and the resources that's so critical in their development. And the neat thing about this is they are teaching kids in every corner of the state of South Dakota, which is very exciting. And the parents are getting very comfortable with this. So that's a neat story. And like I said, I'll try to put a link in the chat to that when I'm done here. Ag technology, I know Shirley spoke of this earlier, and the smart ag, and this really falls into that category. Cattle with Fitbits, maybe 10 years ago, we would have thought that was crazy, but today it's becoming very common. Wireless fences for the animals, precision ag, educational purposes. One group here, Dakota Lakes Research, is doing some unique things for education in the ag world. So that's kind of a neat story. Yeah, and then lack of connectivity, it's not just a convenience, it's a safety issue. And I think that was mentioned earlier too. So that's a critical thing. Okay, and then moving on, the future of Reconnect. Our Reconnect, it's reevaluated each year after each round of funding. And we really try to look at areas that are not currently served, and areas of population that really need that. And so as more progress is made, hopefully we can become more precise and targeted in those areas. And then this is just a list of rural development's program areas. I know Ross mentioned Red Leg earlier, and that falls in our business and cooperative programs, but we also have single family housing, we have community facilities, multifamily housing. We get involved in all kinds of different avenues. I always like to say we can build a community from the ground up, and that is really, really true. So, then on the last slide, I just have my contact information. Feel free to reach out, check out our website. There's a lot of good information on there. And again, I just want to say thank you for allowing me the time to share today. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Burke.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. And thank you to each of our panelists for those great presentations. I will remind our attendees, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and we're happy to dive into those. I know our panelists are excited to discuss what's going on. So I believe each of our panelists have their video on, so we can go ahead and jump into it. Thank you all for taking the time to have this discussion. So the first thing I'd love to dive into a little bit, and Shirley, I might go to you on this, but can you talk a little bit about the technology involved and kind of where things are now and where things are going as far as, you know, internet speed, what it means for a community to get broadband, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, love to talk about that, because I think that you know, there's a question about having no broadband, and that, right, those are folks who are completely unserved. And then there's a group that I would call underserved. And I think that when I think about the many decades I've spent in this industry and what we used to think of 10.1 as being like appropriate speeds, and now I think like, you know, circles of death, the inability to download files, you know, to do a lot of all of the cool services that both Dana and Ross had mentioned, you can't do it with that low capacity. So it's one of the reasons NTCA members have been very, very bullish on fiber. And even Ross was talking about his recent construction projects really being very fiber focused. And, you know, it's important in our mind that rural America have access to the same technology and the same speeds and capacity that we see in urban America. And frankly, fiber is the technology that, while Ross can explain it a lot better than I can, it is almost limitless. It is a wise investment because you are not updating the technology on a 3, 4, 5-year basis. The capacity to do the things that you need to do are automatically there. And when I look at the work that Dan is doing, it's the best investment when you're utilizing government dollars. So while there are parts of the country that still need to have some technology come to them, we consider any technology that is not fiber to be an intermediate step. What can you do to get an immediate need kind of filled while you are waiting for fiber deployment? And that's one of the reasons that I think the Reconnect program has been so very important. It has funded a great deal of fiber investment in the country. And a shout out to USDA. There are numerous government programs out there right now that are doing broadband deployment. The Infrastructure Act, the Farm Bill, we've had a Treasury program, you had ARPA during the recovery, during COVID, a lot of different programs. USDA is the one that signaled and put into place the highest speed requirements. Their speed for Reconnect is 100 over 100. So you can download and upload, you know, synchronous speeds. And as we're even doing this Zoom, that's so important. So you don't have the lag, you don't have the jitter, you don't have that interruption, you don't lose that connectivity. And I am really, really hopeful that as we see a change post this election, and the Farm Bill, which has Reconnect in it, is in a kind of interesting place with potentially 1 year more kick down the can down the road, that we don't see those speeds dumbed down. It's really important. And again, it is important to ensure that rural America have that same access and same connectivity. I would be loath to see rural Americans become second-class citizens on the technology front, because in so many ways, rural communities actually need the connectivity even more. You know, you're not walking down the street to the local hospital or the local clinic, or, you know, the market to sell some of the goods that you're looking to kind of go to market with. So like I said, Ross is probably way more technical than I am, but very bullish on fiber.
I can add a little bit to that. You know, fiber broadband is the broadband we provide. It is the best thing for our community. As I said, you get a snowstorm and you send kids home, and they're immediately online. So if there was a snow on, let's say, a satellite dish, or bad weather, a wireless connection might not work. So that is the medium. You know, we also provide fiber to cell towers too, to make those connected as well. Wireless is not just wireless; it is wired. So that's obviously what we look at doing, look at providing as well. And I also echo USDA. You know, South Dakota is almost 90% fiber covered. And that's just amazing. And it would not be that way if it wasn't for the foresight of the community providers and the resources from things kind of like USF, Universal Service Fund, and the loans that USDA has provided these providers over the years. So kudos to that, and kudos to the foresight of those communities to put in fiber. Fiber is a 20, 30, 40-year asset. So we're not going back into the ground and or going back up on the tower to put new antennas up.
Awesome. Thank you, Ross. And thank you, Shirley. I love this conversation already and how you all are talking about what each other are doing. Dana, did you want to add anything about what kind of the programming from USDA looks like kind of with what Ross was talking about?
Sure. Yeah. The thing I would add here is that it's a partnership. And I've been reminded of that even in just the last year, and talking with like Kara, Semler, and just working and connecting and that partnership piece in the state. And I think that's part of what has really made it work. And then also, with Ross's organization and many other across the state like that, I know sitting down and looking at the map sometimes is just, it's a little overwhelming to me, but then, you sit and you talk about it and you see where the different service areas are and who covers what and what's going on there, then that really makes it more reasonable to understand. And then I also want to mention the tribal areas. I know there's a lot going on there too. And we really try to connect in those areas also. But the thing I want to stress is it's really a partnership, and we needed to communicate on it. And sometimes that starts at the economic development piece and getting a group like Porchlight in to lead some of that discussion and bring the right players together. So that's what I would have to add there.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. One thing that just kind of came up, and I'm not sure who would like to jump in on this, but we talked about, South Dakota is at 90% coverage, which is awesome. That's fantastic. And often, the last mile is the hardest mile in a lot of cases, right? So I'm curious, what are the barriers for, that last 10%? Is it funding? Is it physical infrastructure? Is it community will? I mean, what are kind of the things to get that last mile, and who's affected by that, I guess? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in there, but
I can take that. So just knowing the geography of South Dakota, much of that 10% is the Black Hills. And it's very hard. And I think Dana had mentioned SDN Communications working on a Reconnect grant in the Black Hills to connect a few communities as well. We've done a Reconnect grant, and it was a much more urban place just south of Sioux Falls. I always say you can maybe drive to Home Depot in 15 minutes, but they didn't have very good broadband. They do now, so which is great. But I would tell you most of it is that that geographic issue, where we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a mile just to put in fiber, and some of that isn't feasible, and then that's where maybe that alternate technology is a good idea, of satellite and wireless and things of that sort. So that's probably the main reason. Others is just providers over the years maybe have chose to put in different technologies or put in money in different areas. Most of the providers that are providing in South Dakota are community-based providers, whether they be a municipality that is, that serves its members in the city, a co-op, or even a commercially owned, but they live there, and so they care about that community. So those are probably the ones that are probably done most of the investment in the state over even just the last 10 years.
And I would jump in on what Ross said, because I think his comment about the community-based providers is really, really critical. These are folks who live and work and send their kids to school in these communities. Their elderly parents may be aging in place in these communities. And when you don't have happy customers, you're running into them in the grocery store. I live in Washington, D.C. Verizon doesn't want to talk to me, but it's a really different spirit of service. And I think that's really important to note, because the areas that somebody like a Ross serves, average, NTCA members density is about 5 to 7 customers per mile. Where I am here in the DC area, there's about 400 customers per mile. The network isn't any cheaper. It's just there's a lot fewer people that you are spreading that cost among. And yet when I look at NTCA members, and 85% of their customers have fiber to the home technology, where you don't have that necessarily in Sioux Falls, it all comes down to these folks who know that the livelihood of their community really depends on the service they provide. If Ross isn't providing that service, people are not moving there, they are not staying there, kids are not coming back from college to raise a family there, and that really does make all the difference.
Thank you, Shirley. That's really awesome information. And thinking about kind of, these rural communities that are getting access to broadband and what's happening there, I'm curious, I would love to have an understanding from whoever wants to jump in on this. You all, I'm sure, see this every day of the concrete impact that broadband makes for a business or a community member, going from not either being not served or underserved by broadband to having fiber optic access. I'd love to hear kind of a story maybe that any of you have about what broadband has meant for a particular business or individual and what that looks like. Ross, I saw you on mute.
Yeah, I can take this because actually it was supposed to be something I was going to talk about in my intro that I forgot. So I'll talk about it now. Thank you. Actually, there was a part of the Connect SD program, and we kind of hodgepodged a bunch of different programs together south of Sioux Falls, Reconnect being one of them, a little bit of RDOF, which is a federal program, and then the state program to kind of quilt some stuff together in order to cover that area the best we could. Which worked out great. If you ask my accounting team, they said that didn't work out great because it was really hard to account for, but we'll just move past that. But I will tell you that there was a really good success story in the town of Fairview. You may not even know where Fairview is, but it's on the river, on the border between South Dakota and Iowa. And Fairview is kind of in a valley, and even the cell coverage in that town was very, very minimal, if not even there. And the provider actually had put in a new cabinet to provide copper-based technology, but was not even doing what they should be doing with the money that they had gotten. So we had gotten a grant program for that. And I'll tell you that there's a greenhouse in that town, also a realtor in that town, that was able to not even take credit card payments. They were actually, in some cases, when the network was out, they weren't even able to dial 911. And even actually doing some of the processing online, they would take the payments, have it pending, drive up the hill with their cell phone, make the charges, and come back down. Or I think she even shared a story one time where she would give the person an envelope and said, when you get home, just pay me, and then send the payment back. Obviously, with broadband, that's a little bit easier to do with instant payments like that. So that was just one case that we had heard just from that town, and just not only about 30-40 miles to the west of there was a bed and breakfast that was able to actually update some of their listings and be on Airbnb and actually provide Wi-Fi to the people that were coming in and staying there, and they weren't able to do that before. So those are just two, instances where it did make a very impactful or beneficial case to have reliable broadband.
And I'll throw out another application where we're seeing a difference, and it's in the esports world. And I guess when people start to think about esports, they think about like the gamer hiding in the basement. But think about those kids in your rural community who may not be a football player, or they might be a football player, but they love to game. Well, what we're finding, which is great, and Ross is engaged in this as well, as are some other companies in South Dakota, and actually SDN is actually going to have a big tournament, which I love. Think about what those skills that gamers bring. They bring the ability to think quickly, to do the 3D kind of visual hand-eye coordination. And what I'm finding with NTCA member companies is they're getting really big into supporting their local esports teams. This is not only a way to do great community engagement for those kids who don't traditionally necessarily get the support, But I'm finding that my companies are now taking these kids who are on their sponsor teams and they're becoming their IT interns. They are now becoming their new IT staff people. The FAA is heavily recruiting into this space. You need a robust broadband network to be able to game. It's a great way to kind of show some community spirit. And it's developing that workforce. It's that workforce development at age 12, 13, 14, 15 that really is tying local broadband providers to the youth in their community to kind of train for some really interesting future opportunities. So it's just another thing that we're really starting to see take off that I think is really exciting. And like I said, the fact that SDN is going to be sponsoring a big, I think it's statewide tournament, that's going to be a really fun opportunity for South Dakota. Trust me, those kids are going to be the ones that are going to be leading the tech innovation in the state 10 years from now.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great example, Shirley. Thank you. Dana, did you have anything you wanted to?
Yeah, I was gonna jump in here too, Burke. So earlier in my presentation, I mentioned the Teach Well solutions and that whole story. And I did put a link to that in the chat. Hopefully everyone can watch it because it gets to your heart when you listen to those mothers talk about their children and what's being provided there and what's available. And we all know that's because of, you know, the technology that's out there now and how important it is to have this quality broadband and availability to the technology piece. So that's one. The other thing I'm going to mention is a little bit personal, and it's tugging at my heart today because just you'll understand after I tell this story. But I have a great nephew who has just been diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer. And like we're talking very rare. And so they've been doing some doctoring in Rochester at Mayo and things like that. And he's actually there today to start his first treatment, but they've had a lot of visits with the doctor and nurse visits and things like that. And I think our family has come to realize that not having to make a trip over there and having this fabulous technology in South Dakota where we can easily connect and, not only does it save on the pocketbook, but, you can maybe have more visits with that doctor or that nurse when it's a really, really tough situation. So just a couple there. Also in the egg side, I've heard a lot of egg producers talk about how, they can connect up now and they don't have to go out in the barn every night in the middle of the night to check on their cattle because they have many other means of technology now, to watch over that. So I think that all connects in this big picture of the broadband world and just everything. So yeah, that's what I have to add.
I would have loved some technology when I was on my farm, when I was the sacrificial child that had to go out and check cows during calving. So that would have been really lovely to have a camera beamed in on those critters to save me a walk out at night in the winter. So I want to go back to something that all three of you have talked about in one way or another, and that's the connection to childcare and technology. Over the last year, Porchlight has done quite a bit of research in all sorts of different size communities when it comes to childcare, and on top of that is that conversation about what technology looks like. Can you share from your perspectives, and all of you can speak on this or just one of you can, share your thoughts on how technology and childcare are connected?
Okay, this was like playing a Jeopardy game of who's going to like release the buzzer first. So I will just share. So we actually, our Foundation for Rural Service just literally put out this report on understanding childcare challenges in rural America. And Jessica, to your point, while it's not talking about how you use cameras in a childcare center, although having a grandchild in a daycare center, it is amazing how much constant connectivity you can have, much to poor children's probably future detriment. But what we really detail here are some case studies and some tips and some thoughts, action plans. very much like what Ross talked about. It's that partnership. It's thinking about these community-based providers as being that local anchor. They're an essential service provider. So when Ross is working with USDA to get a red leg loan to help create these centers or give them land or support these efforts, I look at it a little bit more from a workforce development issue. You can't get good people to stay and to come into the workforce if they've got to drop out because they're driving 2 hours to get good care. So how can community-based leaders come together, whether the support of government, local, state, federal, to actually address some of these issues, and until we kind of come together as a country and really say, this is not a woman's issue. This is an economic issue. It's not just moms, it's dads, it's families, it's everybody together, it's grandparents. And we've got to do a better job if we're really going to, continue to ensure that you're keeping people in rural America. So again, we've got this resource. If anybody is interested, it's got some great tips. Our Foundation for Rural Services very engaged in issues that really kind of speak to rural health.
I was hoping you'd mention that, and that's why I was hoping you'd go first, because I knew that that report was out there. So that's great. Thanks, Shirley. Yes, it's a great read. A lot of good tips, got a good information in there. A lot of case study kind of things and what worked for other communities. So like I said, I joked with my board when we were doing some of these daycare loans and grants and things of that sort that, this is the year of babies and broadband, and it really was important, and they understood that it was important. But not only that, but just the technology, just going off of daycares and just for schools, and my two kids bring an iPad home every day and do all their homework on that. And remember being at home during the COVID, or even during let's knock on wood, snow days. So far we haven't had any, but that's important too, of having that connectivity and having the ability to do their research, their schoolwork, things of that sort at home or in other places in the community. So that is huge. And then back to the esports thing, just having the capability networked to be there, and not the limiting factor, but the enhancing the activities of the child, of the community, of the business, of the school system, and not being a limiting factor, but being able to almost help them along the way of whatever they're trying to develop.
Yeah, and I think too, when we think of childcare, and we do a lot with childcare, daycare. We have the Red Leg, and then we also have our community facility program where we've done a lot with daycares and childcare and the whole educational piece. That's a big piece of it, and we want those kiddos to have that access to what's ever needed. And in this day and age, we have to keep up with the times, and we have to make sure they have all those resources available, and there's no limitations there. And that goes for every corner of the state. And again, finding that access and that availability throughout the whole state, I think, is the key thing there. Yeah, that's all I would add there.
I do have one more thing to add, a little bit about children, but as a whole, and to tie back into the mental health thing, is one of the things that we've seen quite a bit of, working with Horizon Health in the middle of the state, and they a lot of support for emotional assistance and things of that sort, where a psychologist or a therapist and things of that sort, they need help. And that definitely have seen that both with our counselors, both with childcare and in schools, but just in general with rural communities. Seen a lot more access to that because of having broadband. And not only that, but we've seen, I've heard a lot of stories about people going and getting help when they probably wouldn't have. In a small community, if you're driving up to the clinic and the clinic is this, and everybody knows what you drive, and then they'll open your business, and that's what's happening. But when you're online and you're able to get that help or that assistance, both when you need it via telehealth and privately. It does allow for, it brings the barriers down a little bit, and I think helps the people that need it in a way that I didn't really think of when we were deploying fiber, but I'm sure glad to hear that benefit now.
That's a really good point, Ross. I mean, it doesn't matter how you get the help, just as long as you do get the help. And if broadband can be a piece of that tool, all the better. So thank you. That's a great way to end. So thank you. Dina, Shirley, and Ross, thank you so much for spending some time and sharing your expertise with us. I know South Dakota is lucky to have relationships with all of you, and we see your good work every single day. And as we said at the beginning, this webinar, we put this on our YouTube page. And so you'll be able to access this after. So if you have a colleague or a friend that you feel like this conversation would be helpful for, please send them that our way. This is also going to be saved in our resource drive. If you want to learn more about who we are and what we do, head to our website, porchlight-services.com, and subscribe to our newsletter. If you'd like to dive deeper into this topic and have access to our resource drive, where there's all sorts of really cool things that you can use in your community or in your business, head to porchlight-services.com/subscriptions and sign up. Here you'll find all sorts of the information to help grow your communities. Next month, we're really excited about next month's panelist. We are holding our discussion titled Living in the Middle of Everywhere, presented by Ben Winchester from the Minnesota Extension Office. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you had fun and you'll be joining us next month. Have a great day, everyone.